Well, good morning, everybody, and I should thank George for this very kind, very inspiring introduction, and I hope I will be able to fulfill the expectations after this very generous introduction. And I'm, of course, thankful to the Archons for inviting me here and organizing this very important conference in the first place in Brussels. Well, we from a Turkish side, I wanted to, speak a little bit about how the issue is seen in Turkey, and which different political camps, are more helpful or more promising with regards to religious freedom in Turkey, and which political camps are not that promising and are not that helpful. I'll try to give a little bit of background and a perspective about all that. And before that, I should say, maybe to begin with, I, as a Turkish Muslim, am a staunch defender of the rights of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And it's, thank you. For I believe every human being and every human institution has the right to define its own name, especially if it's a 2,000-year-old name. And I think no state has the right to dictate to people that what their names will be or what their institutions' names will be. I think it's a general principle. And I am also a defender of the reopening of the Halki Seminary and all other religious freedom issues in Turkey. I'm a total defender of the headscarf, freedom for the headscarf in public, in anywhere. And I defend these, first of all, as someone who believes in freedom as a principle. But besides that, my personal reason to defend the rights of Christians and Jews and other believers in God in Turkey is that as a Muslim, my religion compels me to stand for the rights of fellow believers in God. And to explain why, I will need to do a little bit of history. So the first slide, please. Okay. Well, this is the famous painting, famous mosaic of Fatih Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan, the seventh Sultan who conquered Istanbul, giving his blessings and his guarantee to the Ecumenical Patriarchate of the time. This is just mosaic is in Istanbul, right there at the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and this symbolizes the Ottoman approach to non-Muslim nations, as the Ottomans called that, within their empire. They saw them as rightful peoples who had their religious freedom and who could worship under the protection of the Ottoman state. And this was an Ottoman vision based on pragmatism, to be honest, in the first place. That's an empire. You run empires by, loosely, by not integrating, by not meddling into people's affairs, and that's how the Ottomans managed to run the empire for 6 centuries, basically. But it was also based on a very core Islamic idea that the people of the book, the Ahl Kitab in Arabic, the non-Muslim fellow monotheists, the Christians and Jews, had their right to worship, and that was protected in Islamic law. So the Ottomans, both out of pragmatism, but both because of their religious rules and laws, had to respect Jews and Christians. And in fact, there's an interesting episode in the Ottoman history. 2 sultans after Fatih, Sultan Yavuz IX, he at some point considered forcibly converting all Christians into Islam for the sake of homogeneity, to have a more proper empire, everybody Muslim. It was his top scholar of Islam, his Sheikhul Islam, as the Ottomans called that, the scholar whose job was to oversee the works of state and make sure that they're compatible with Islamic law. He said this would be against the Sharia, and you cannot do this. And that was why, Yavuz backed off from the idea and dissuaded. And so, the word Sharia in today, horrible things are done in the modern world in the name of the Sharia because some people want to keep it as it was in the medieval times. But in the Middle Ages, the Sharia was a kind of constraint on the executive because it was not a dictate of the state. It was created by scholars, and it was constraining some of the excesses of the state and the political authority, in this case, the Ottoman Sultan. And so centuries went on like this. And it's interesting that in the 18th century, we find the Patriarch of Jerusalem noting this. I'm quoting, God raised out of nothing this powerful empire of the Ottomans in place of our Roman, in other words, Byzantine empire. And God put into the heart of the Sultan of these Ottomans an inclination to keep free the religious beliefs of our Orthodox faith. I should say that this Ottoman tolerance, if you will, the right term, to non-Muslims, in this case the Orthodox Christians, was not based on equality. Like in all pre-modern states, Muslims, some group was superior, and in the Ottoman case it was the Muslims, obviously. It was an Islamic empire. And that's why the empire were divided into nations, Muslim nation, and in the Muslim nations you had all various ethnic identities, it didn't matter that much, was the superior nation, and then the Greeks, and then would come the Armenians and the Jews, and it would go in like a hierarchy. They were all given religious freedom, but they were not equal citizens. But in the 19th century, the Ottomans, seeing nationalism rising in the Balkans, with an inspiration from the French Revolution, but also nationalism of the time, and willing to keep the empire intact, and also understanding that there are changes in Europe, there are some modern ideas, like democracy, like parliament, like equal citizenship. They started to also absorb these ideas. And that's why in the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had an important modernization effort, which we call the Tanzimat, which means reorganization. It was an edict, an imperial edict in 1839. And right after Tanzimat, and in the Tanzimat, basically, the rights of the Ottoman subjects, all of them were strengthened. The Sultan accepted further constraints on his rule. And in 1856, with another decree, Jews and Christians were given full equal citizenship rights. That's important because in traditional Islamic law, Jews and Christians are respected, but they're regarded as zimmis, protected but not equal people. So the Ottoman Empire made them equal citizens. And that's why in late 19th century in the Ottoman Empire, you see non-Muslims like Armenians, Jews, and of course Orthodox Christians becoming members of the higher bureaucracy, joining the Ottoman parliament. And I'll come to that in a moment. Next slide, please. I'll want to show you a picture which gives you a spirit of the Ottoman reforms. This is a poster, this is a painting, a poster regarding the first Ottoman constitution of 1876. This was drawn later in 1895. But this symbolizes the Ottoman era of modernization. Here is the homeland, the lady, and he's being liberated. The chains are being broken by Namık Kemal, who's known as one of the leading intellectuals, liberal Muslim intellectuals of the time. They're breaking the chains, setting the homeland free. At the top, there is the Lady Liberty flying in the air with Arabic and also Greek words saying liberty, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And please note that at the back, Ottoman citizens are happy, and there is also a Greek person here with some Christian flag. So it is not just the Muslims, it's all citizens becoming equal. In theory, this was the idea of Ottoman, modern citizenship idea with the Constitution of 1876. But did things work full in reality? No. I mean, equality became a state policy, but not the society fully get that. But this was the line of the Ottoman reforms. I should also say that during the Tanzimat reform, apostasy became free in the Ottoman Empire, like changing your religion and leaving Islam and becoming Christian. That was, again, in classical Sharia, that's banned, that's just capital punishment for it, which is a political consideration, but that's a different matter. So the Ottomans also allowed apostasy, hence you had missionaries all over the Ottoman Empire. So this, another slide, please. Okay, next one. This is, by the way, a painting in Cairo Punch, a British magazine published in Cairo, about the second Ottoman parliament in 1908. The Sultan, opening the parliament, and you can see the Armenian Patriarch right here, and the Greek Orthodox, the Ecumenical Patriarch right there, and various communities from the Ottoman Empire, religious clerics in garments, and you have, and in fact, this Ottoman parliament of 1908, 1/3 of its members were non-Muslims. It was not simply an Islamic state, not a state for Muslims. It was a ecumenical, pluralistic state. So this was what the Ottomans were aspiring to, but it did not work. Why? Simply because of nationalism rather than anything else. Because many nations of the empire, especially the Christians of the Balkans, were willing to achieve independence rather than just equal citizenship under the Ottomans. So you had lots of revolts against the empire. And in the mind of the Turks who continued to rule the empire, the Christians became, over time, a potential threat, that who will rebel and try to form a homeland and do some ethnic cleansing there, actually. In the Balkans, many Turks were ethnically cleansed. In the Caucasus, my grandfather ran away from the Russians, who were brutally killing, Muslims of the Caucasus, so they came to Anatolia. So there's a bad memory created by these national, liberation movements and independence movements in the Balkans and the Caucasus. And after especially the Balkan Wars, the disastrous ones for the Ottomans, 1912, 1911, 1913, the ruling elite, especially the Young Turk Party, which was a new political movement in the Ottoman Empire, which was not believing in the Ottoman ecumenism that much, but which were more convinced by Turkish nationalism, took the lead. I mean, they captured the empire in 1913 after a military coup, and they followed a policy based on more of a Turkish nationalism. And when they saw the Armenian revolt in 1915 with alliance with the Russians, they took their most disastrous decision to expel the Armenians from eastern Turkey, which led to a horrible ethnic cleansing, as we know, which led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands and killing of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. But we should see that this happened in some certain political context. I'm not saying this to just justify it or to minimize the tragedy there, but to understand why it happened. So ultimately, this whole crumbling of the empire and the revolt from the minorities, which actually, interestingly, excluded the Jews. Jews never had a political rebellion against the empire because they did not claim a homeland. Well, Zionists would claim later, but that's a different thing. The Jews of the Ottoman Empire never looked for a homeland, so they never had a political will to establish an independent state. So there's actually, in the Balkan Wars, you see Jews and Turks being persecuted by Balkan nationals at the same time and running back to the empire proper, to mainstream to mainland Turkey. Ultimately, the empire entered into World War I on the side of Germany, and a disastrous war again, and many people are killed. And Turkey becomes, after World War I, occupied. Mainland Turkey, Anatolia, becomes occupied and divided by the occupying powers. Next slide, please. Maybe you don't know what this is, but every Turk knows this, because that's as a Turkish child, when you go to school, that's the first thing you'll learn, the Treaty of Sevres. And for years and years, we keep the memory of the Treaty of Sevres. This was drafted in 1920 by the occupying powers. And this is Anatolia, as you can see, and it was given, parts of it was given to different states, different groups. I mean, the British got the Marmara, the east, the Istanbul and the surrounding regions. The Greeks got Smyrna or Izmir or some parts in the Thrace. The Italians got a big chunk in the south. The French got another big chunk in here. And again, the British got the oil, potentially, not oil rich, but it could be, at the time. The zone in Iraq, bordering Iraq. There was a big Armenia, and Turkey was something in small in central Anatolia without much access to any of the important historical places in the country. So this was the Treaty of Sevres, and Turkey fought its war of liberation basically against the Treaty of Sevres, and who wanted to realize this plan. And we won the war, and again it was disastrous from the Greek side, it depends on which side you're looking at. From a Turkish side, it's a war of liberation, and Turkey secured its borders. And then Turkey abolished the Ottoman Empire and became a republic. But the memory of the Sevres did never fade from a Turkish mindset. And it was, again, kept consciously alive by the state. So when I was a 7, 8-year-old kid, we were doing national celebrations in school, and there would be a Treaty of Sevres at the behind, and we would come with our bayonets and destroying Sevres and saving our homeland. That's how you grow up in Turkey, and that national education is that. And the thing is, Sevres was a dark moment for the Turks, obviously, and I'm proud that it didn't happen, but the world has changed since Sevres. I mean, this was World War I, and there was a Second World War, and then there's the EU, and there's a whole world new out there. But there are many people in Turkey who still think that Sevres is in some secret drawer in Brussels or in the US or something, that people are trying to do that. And the Turkish state propaganda always referred to the Sevres to explain the problems inside. Why do we have a Kurdish question? Not because we did something to the Kurds, but because foreign powers who want to realize the Sevres want to use them as a means to, to realize the Sevres somehow. Why are we being questioned on what happened to the Armenians? Not because there's some historical reality there, which hurt the Armenians, obviously, because the Armenian thing is on the map. It's on Sevres. They're trying to push that. So that's a very well-established political line in Turkey. Now, after Sevres, what happened? Turkey became a republic, as I said, and okay, of course, it's like the empire was abolished, and modern Turkey was formed. And the term modern Turkey, of course, the term modern always sounds good, or most of the time, but not everything that is modern is always good. And modern Turkey was founded, although it was founded by the democratic Ottoman parliament, it became a single-party state in just a few years. And it created an official ideology. An official ideology taking its inspiration from French Enlightenment and German materialism, so a kind of almost religious, stance on the secular front. So it had secularism, but it's not secularism in the sense of separation of church and state as it's in the U.S. It's a secularism which is almost hostile to religion, and a very fierce nationalism. And this became the first 25 years of a Turkish Republic was defined by this official ideology. And next slide, please. I want to show you a photo. This is like a painting made by 1933 by Zeki Faik Sezer, one of the artists of the time, to give the sense of a Turkish revolution. Those who know the French painter Delacroix and the revolution idea there, French Revolution, it's just it's shown here. So you see Atatürk, the leader of a Turkish revolution, there showing the right way to the nation. The nation is following him passionately, and Lady Liberty, a bit less, undressed than Delacroix's lady there, she's there. But what is most important here, I think, is the people here. Look at these people. These are being trampled upon. These are being swept aside by the revolution. And who are they? This is a cleric, an imam, another one here, and an Ottoman pasha here. The ancien regime, the old regime being trampled upon by the revolutionaries. And it's not an accident that clerics were there, because anti-clericalism, if you will, was also one of the signs of the Turkish Revolution. So all religious institutions, civil institutions, independent from the state, were closed down in 1924, Islamic and non-Muslim. For example, yesterday we listened to the problems of the minorities in Turkey, the non-Muslim minorities, and they're very important problems. But many of them are also valid for the Muslims themselves. Like, you can't have a Muslim foundation in Turkey as defined by Islam. I mean, all the Sufi orders, Naqshbandis or the Qadris, the classical Sufi orders, they're still, they're active and they may be very powerful economically and so on. But legally, they're not valid. They're banned since 1924. The secularism softened over time, so in reality, things changed. But legally still, the secularism of 1924, which is defined by a will to see no religion in society. And let me quote one of the leading party members of the time, the third man after Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, Recep Peker. He said, secularism means that in the Turkish Republic, religious considerations cannot exceed the skin of the citizen, which means it can only be inside yourself, and you cannot make it obvious. Hence comes the ban, for example, on religious garments. In Turkey, you cannot see an imam or a priest walking on the street because that's banned. That's religious symbol that should not be out in the street. So while we are criticizing the problems of the religious minorities in Turkey, that's why I think we should also see the religious majority also sometimes have the same problems because of simply the understanding of secularism. And also, of course, comes nationalism, which is these two strong ideas. Nationalism, secularism are the two pillars of the revolution. And I am a person who's in favor of secularism if it is like it's in the United States, like the First Amendment, which protects freedom and the free exercise clause. But in Turkey, it's not that way. It doesn't exactly mean that way. It means that state manipulates religion, it dominates religion, it limits religion as much as it wants. It is not secularism in a very civil democratic sense. So these two ideologies became the guiding light for the Kemalist revolution and the Kemalist ideology, which has shaped Turkey since then, since 1920s. And interestingly, this ideology wanted to transform the society into something else, created a new man. And I call it the Homo Kemalicus, that this regime wanted to create, coming from the name of Mustafa Kemal. And it is an interesting formula. In order to be a good citizen, you have to be a Muslim, a Sunni Muslim, but you have to be very secular at the same time. If you're a practicing Sunni Muslim, you're not a good person. So you have to be secularized. If you are a non-Muslim, you are the ultimate bête noire. They want to minimize you, they want to exclude you. If you are a non-Turkish Muslim, like a Kurd, then again, you're a problem. You have to be Turkified. So the regime basically wants to change everybody into something else. If you're non-Muslim, you're either sent away by population exchange, or you're kept under the thumb and you don't have the full rights, although it writes in legal books, but you don't have exactly the same thing. If you're Kurdish, then you have to be Turkified. If you're Alevi, which is an interesting story. In the early years of Republic, they did not have much problem, and I should criticize religious conservatives, Sunni conservatives here, to be not tolerant towards Alevis. That's another story. But if you're an Alevi, you have to be turned into a Sunni. If you're a Sunni, you have to be turned into a non-practicing Sunni. So unless you're like 20–25%, which really identifies itself with the Kemalist revolution, somehow you are not fully the desired citizen. And this has been the mindset, I think, of the regime. And the problems and the limitations on religious minorities especially increased and were enhanced during times of political crises, especially with Greece. For example, here's one important difference between the Ottoman paradigm and what I call the Republican paradigm. In the Ottoman Empire, non-Muslims were a nation of the empire. It was their own people, In the Republican era, non-Muslims became the fifth column of the foreigner inside. So the Ecumenical Patriarchate was seen as an extension of Greece, although it is not, but that's how the Republican mentality saw it. Or the Armenians became the fifth column of imperialist West. Or the Kurds became the fifth column of US recently. That's a new development. And so that's why many Turks think that anything which strengthens the Ecumenical Patriarchate or other religious minorities will serve the interests of those who supposedly want to realize the Treaty of Sevres again. Not your actual own citizens, but someone who really don't see. And there's an interesting also dilemma here. The Republic wanted to secularize Muslims very passionately. So it was not a great fan of Islam, if you will. But also, it saw Islam as a bond for the nation. That's why, non-Muslims were sent away, not because it was Islamist, but because, it was thought that Muslims would form the Turkish nation, and then you had to secularize them. This went on for decades, and the problems, of course, arose especially in times of political crises, and especially in times of military coups in Turkey. For example, the Halki Seminary was closed in 1971, when there was an indirect military coup in Turkey, and the judiciary, the military, as it often does, was manipulating the judiciary to, minimize democratic freedoms. So it was a judicial decision, ultimately and obviously, controlled by the military. And again, the oppression of the Syriac community in these came, especially after the military coup of 1980, when the generals, they tortured hundreds of Turks, and they did a lot of horrible things, but they also thought minorities are threats. And for example, it was the generals' decision to rename all Greek or Armenian villages or cities in Turkey and give them Turkish names. Also rename all the Kurdish towns. Like there are towns in Turkey like Güzelce, which is 30 of them around Turkey. It's just all over. It means just beautiful place, Well, when you go back, Güzelce was something in Greek or Armenian or Kurdish or something in the past. So it was this militaristic, very nationalist and secularist ideology at the same time, which saw the minorities and the religious majority at the same time as a threat. So I should say that there are maybe some historical reasons in that part of the world to be suspicious. You know, you had War of Liberations. Maybe it was not totally paranoid to think that Turkey would be divided maybe some 50, 40, 80 years ago. But after, in such a world in which, you know, people don't fight for wars of liberation, you know, it's an EU, you know, it's a world like the EU, and it's a global world. I think Turkey needs to get over those fears and understand that accepting the rights of its minorities and the majority will just further enhance Turkey, not, you know, make Turkey a worse place or put in danger. The question is, doesn't anybody understand these things in Turkey? People do understand, and that's why from the beginning, especially from the 80s on, we have something called the liberal movement in Turkey. And the liberal movement, or the liberals, these are kind of people who know the West, who know how democracy works in a normal country, and who says, we need a different Turkey. But we always had a problem. Liberals make like 1% of a Turkish society. There was a liberal party in 1997, they got 0.5% of the votes. So they promoted something like total like EU reforms, but you know, who are the liberals? People don't know that. There's a big chunk of secular nationalists, maybe 20, 30%. They don't like the liberals, they think the liberals are traitors. Not all, but you know, there's a strong line there. And then you have maybe 50% of the Turkish society, religious conservatives, who go to mosque, who wear a headscarf, or whose wife wear a headscarf. The good thing, which really astonishes some people there, the religious conservatives, who were themselves being unjustly, you know, treated by the states, like the headscarf ban, at some point started to realize that the way to get rid of this authoritarian state mentality is to accept EU norms, to accept the Western-style democracy. Because in the past, they didn't understand. They thought that the authoritarian state on top of them was an extension of the West, so they were seeing the West as the problem. But at some point, they realized that the West is maybe the solution. By adopting EU norms, you can, you know, democratize Turkey and benefit as a conservative Muslim, and also you can join forces with other groups that are, you know, pressured in Turkey. And I think that's the origin of the transformation of the conservative Islamic camp in Turkey in the past decade. That's why they have become more pro-EU or more pro-Western than they have ever been. And the funny thing is right now that the secular nationalist establishment accuses the religious conservatives, especially the AKP, the Justice and Development Party, who we listened yesterday, to be a Western puppet. That they are serving the interests of the West, and they are too pro-Christian or too, you know, and they are, you know, in line with the liberals. And this is a very strong theme in Turkey. And for example, the Justice and Development Party, the AKP, and Prime Minister Erdogan, and I too criticize them for not being enough in all these measures, like in all these issues. But they're kind of, I see them as a half glass better than a totally empty glass. So they have done important things, they should do more. But they're being accused in Turkey to be puppets of the Sevres, you know, the powers that be, which would realize the Sevres. And I want to show you a few pictures from that. Next slide, please. This is the Republican paradigm. Like, we're all marching in the same direction with flags and nationalism and others at the back. So next slide, one. This is a cartoon on the cover of Turkey's most popular, cartoon satirical magazine. And here's Tayyip Erdogan, the prime minister. He's on a prayer rug, as you can see. He's a conservative Muslim, he prays, but the prayer rug is an American flag. So, and it says, well, there's a famous quote of Erdogan, which put him in prison in the 80s. He said, mosques are our bayonets, and mosques are our, you know, barracks, and minarets are our bayonets. It was like a national war of liberation poem, and it says, America is our friend. So, in this, Tayyip Erdogan is serving America. That's a very powerful, you know, thing. Next slide, please. Here is another news in the Turkish press, Yeni Çağ, a very nationalist newspaper, and it says Ayasofya Haçlı Seferi, which means a crusade, like a war crusade on Saint Sophia. And it says AKP'den Hristiyanlığa büyük hizmet, which means great service from the AKP to Christianity. And of course they hate that, you know. So they are, and you can see AKP with, you know, cross, and it says Akdamar goes to Armenians, and Sumela goes to goes to the Greeks, and they denounce that. And it says here, Ecdada ihanet, a treason to our ancestors. So this is what they are getting. They're getting the heat at home from people like this. Next slide, please. Here's another like a play on Erdogan. This was actually an AKP propaganda poster for the election, for actually this Bayram that we are in right now. A nationalist website played with this. You can see Erdogan there. So this is just a faked, propaganda poster changed into something else. So Erdogan is there. At the back there are US and EU flags, so Erdogan is, serving these powers. And it says, since this is the feast of the sacrifice, it says, let myself be a sacrifice for the EU and the US. So he's sacrificing himself for the EU and the US. And it says, again, her şey ABD için, it means everything is for EU and US. And another website zoomed, this is what Erdogan wore in a doctorate, he got a doctorate, symbolic, in a university. It happened that there was a cross here. And they zoomed this and put it with the cross here and say, oh, Erdogan is serving the Crusaders or something. Now, as insane as this is, it makes sense to millions in Turkey, because they have never seen anything besides the national paradigm of the threat, the serve, the internal enemies, the external enemies, somebody tried to divide us. And that really plays out. I mean, the party, Nationalist Action Party, which airs this line, gets 13% of the votes. The other party, the supposedly secular and modern Atatürkist party, it is now trying to reform itself to a degree, but it has very strong lines here. It's also airing some of the ideas here. And that's why they have opposed most of the EU reforms recently, seeing that the Islamists, saying that, oh, the EU is serving the religious people. And when you say religious, they don't like imams, they don't like Christian priests. Any religion as such is a problem for that mentality. And I think we have one more slide. Can we see that? Okay, this is the best. This is a best-selling book about Tayyip Erdogan, published 3 years ago. It says The Children of Moses, Tayyip and Emine. You can see Erdogan and his wife, Emine Erdogan here. She's obviously a conservative Muslim wearing the headscarf. The book argues that they are crypto-Jews serving the elders of Zion to destroy Atatürk's republic and create something good for Israel and the West and the EU and all the things you can imagine. This became this is the third one, but this printed, I don't know, 30 prints or something, and it became a bestseller that year among these hardline nationalist secularists. I don't know what they think after Erdogan's, storm in Davos and all Erdogan's, criticism. This came before that. Maybe that argument would not hold that much after that, but still, this shows how tables have been overturned. In the past, the Islamic camp in Turkey used to do the anti-Semitic, not the whole Islamic camp, but the diehard Islamists, and they still do, have some anti-Semitic rhetoric. You see secular nationalists and who think Atatürk is like the demigod that we should literally follow forever. They are using this line against Erdogan. So what I'm trying to say is this, ultimately. Maybe I talk too much, so I'm just finishing in a minute. In Turkey today, the paradigms are fighting with each other. The early Republican paradigm, this defined by a strict nationalism and a strict secularism, is an obstacle to religious freedom. Whereas on the other side, you have liberals like Orhan Kemal, like you listened to yesterday. And these are the people who really principally, believe in EU norms and, and they defend. But the better news is that the bigger religious masses, the conservatives, they have also not in full, not as principled as it should be, but they're understanding that religious freedom is for all. And that's why you see very pious Muslim intellectuals saying that the Halki seminary should be reopened. As we want schools for our kids, Muslim schools, they should have the right to have their Christian schools. And I think that's where the power lies, because that's 50% of Turkish society. And that's 50% of Turkish society. The conservatives have a good frame of reference in the Ottoman experience. So, I mean, you can take something from EU and that's good, but also you should refer to something in your own tradition. I mean, there's one problem in just importing democracy with totally foreign concepts, but if you can also find references for that in your tradition, and that's what I'm trying to do, find the references in the Ottoman Empire to show that the Halki Seminary was built under the Ottoman Empire and it was free until 1971, until some nationalist generals closed it down. The Ecumenical Patriarchate was ecumenical, and the Ottomans never thought of interfering with its name for centuries. And they did this because they were not good Muslims. Rather, they did this because they were good Muslims. And I think that's an important message that Turkish society needs to get, and I believe that they're getting that message. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great presentation. I had a question about what you outlined as a new model. It sounded like you were almost saying a kind of neo-Ottoman model. And although certainly better than a Kemalist, secularist model when it comes to religious freedom, it's not a true model of liberal democracy, and certainly means that even if more free than under Kemalist secularism, religious minorities are not fully free and they're second-class citizens. So I wondered if you could talk about the potential slippery slope of referencing the Ottoman Empire as something that's positive for religious freedom, because after all, it wasn't.
Well, I certainly am not proposing a political model based on the Ottoman Empire, or like just reestablishing an empire with a monarchy. I'm certainly not speaking about that. I'm just saying that Turks can find good references in their history to overcome some of the excessive nationalism of the 20th century. Of course, there will never be an Ottoman Empire again. There should never be an Ottoman Empire again. There should probably never be an empire as such again, because we're living in a different world. We're living in post-nation states, different world. And I'm just saying that to convince someone for religious freedom, you can go there saying that, well, EU says this, and the person says, who the hell is EU? And so what do you do? If there are frames of reference in his own tradition, and that's how democracy evolved in the West, by finding references in the New Testament, like the separation of church and state, and Jesus saying, render unto God and render unto Caesar, and finding those references. Although you might be selective in finding those references, maybe you should be selective, that's fine. So I'm referring to an Ottoman culture being rediscovered, not a political system. So what I want is a liberal democracy for Turkey. But liberal democracies also have their cultures and histories. And that's why I think rediscovering some of the good aspects of the Ottoman tradition, and especially the late Ottoman tradition, in which Jews and Christians and Muslims became equal citizens in the Tanzimat period, I think that's an important frame of reference. Thanks. Thank you.